Welcome back. We got our tests to work, and Google search right now is working pretty nicely. I'm pretty happy with it, and I think we can move on. Let's create another script and have perhaps a more realistic or a harder function than this to test. So I'm going to just add a new file and call it script2.js. And we definitely want to write some tests for it, but for now, let's just write our function and what it's going to do. Now, one of the harder tests to write, and something that you might be thinking of, is asynchronous tests. I mean, right now, you can see that with Google search, we can copy this with pretty much any function. And you might see why pure functions are so good to test. I mean, you're just testing function. You're just adding some random inputs and making sure that the outputs are what they're expected. Very nice and simple. And they're all just synchronous, nice tests. But in real life, we most likely have fetch calls or API calls that are asynchronous. How do we test for those? Well, in this video, let's tackle that. For this exercise, I'm going to use an API that I really like called Swappy. And yep, that stands for the Star Wars API. It's free and it's awesome. I recommend it in the other course as well. So some people might be familiar with it, but yeah, it's great. You can see here that you can request planets, you can request people, you can request starships, all from Star Wars. Yeah, pretty awesome. Using the Star Wars API, you can see that this is the endpoint that we can hit to get the JSON response. Let's create a nice little function for us to use that we can test. Now, fetch in Node won't work because if you remember, fetch is something that's implemented by the browser. And it's on the window object. But in Node, there's no such thing as a window object. So there's no window.fetch. For that, we need to install something called Node Fetch. And there's a few other libraries that you can use, so you can do fetch calls from Node. But let's just stick with this one for now. This way, we can now have fetch in Node. And again, we import it with the common JS way because imports and exports are not available yet in Node. And then just import Node Fetch. All right, and in here, let's do a const get people from Star Wars. And let's say this is going to receive the fetch. Remember, we're doing a bit of dependency injection here so that we can test and we can keep this nice and easy to test as possible. In here, we can say that we're going to return fetch. And I know this is a little bit redundant because we could just not have an input and have fetch, but it shows, I think, dependency injection really well. And this isn't something that you necessarily always need to do, but for this purposes, I think it's a good way for you to get familiar with dependency injection. In here, we're going to have the Star Wars API. Let's go back to what they had. And let's copy this and say that we want to request the people API. And if you remember, we always need to do our classic .then response and then run the JSON method on the response. And then finally, we have our data, which will be the people that it returns. So let's say in here, we're just going to return an object that has a count, because if we go to people over here, because we want to get all the characters, we get a count variable of all the characters in the API. So let's do that. We'll say count. And actually, this should be data.count. And then we'll do results, that will just have the data dot results, which will have all the people in an array and each person in an object. All right, let's save that, and I want to make sure this works, so we'll just do console.log get people and pass in the fetch function to it. I'm going to save, and let's just run node. Let me clear this for now. And actually, just because this is asynchronous, a nicer way of doing this is just in here, console logging the data. Let's save and run npm script2.js. And we have to wait a bit, but you see over here that, all right, we got all the characters with count to 87, and we got Luke Skywalker. What else? We got C3PO, R2D2, all the main cats. Awesome. This is working. And you know what? While we're at it, just for fun, since this is using a promise, let's also add the async await version of the code. And let's just remove the call and just say that getPeople is going to use the async await. So that means in front of the function, we're going to do async. And now we can use the await keyword. So we can just say const get request equals await the fetch call. And now we can say that the const data again equals await the get request .json, and now we can remove the .then and keep everything the way we had it. Let me add the semicolons, and let's just make this smaller so you can see better. And we can move this on this line. You can decide for yourself what looks cleaner. But let's test out this as well to make sure that it works. So get people, and we'll add fetch. Going to save and run npm. Oops, not there. Run it here. npm run node script2.js. We wait a bit, and there you go. Everything is working. I don't know why I decided to show that in the test video, but I'm sure somebody out there is going to find this useful to compare promises and async. A little bit of a tangent, but let's get back on track here. Let's actually start writing tests for our async code. Again, the first thing we're going to do, and I'm going to remove the get people and console log from here. Let's save. And I'm going to create a new file, call it script2.test.js. And within here, we want to do a few things. First, we want to use the fetch function. So we need the require node fetch. Again, because we have used dependency injection, and we need the parameter fetch for the get people. And then we also need the function from the Swappy API that returns the get people. For now, let's just say require script2.js. Oh, we don't need the JS. But remember, because this isn't a node package, we need to actually give it the path. All right, so let's export the function. Let's just export both of these for now. We'll say module.exports, and we export them in an object. We'll say get people, and instead of doing get people again, shorthand with ES6 is to just do get people and get people promise, which is the same thing as get people semicolon get people. property and value, property and value. All right. So now within here, we'll have access to our functions, both of them. Let's take a break, and in the next video, we're going to finish up this test. I'll see you in that one. Bye-bye.